It was already late at night when Camila realized she was the only person still in the building. The clock in the corner of the screen read 11:47 p.m. The office was plunged into near silence, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional creak of the wooden furniture that held her computer. She stretched, rolling her tense shoulders. She had been stuck with tight deadlines for weeks, accumulating overtime to finish a report that, deep down, no one would even give much importance to. But perfectionism was her punishment. She got up, picked up her bag and walked through the deserted corridors. The lights were on low power, flickering from time to time, casting angular shadows on the carpet. Camila felt an involuntary shiver. Maybe it was just fatigue. The elevator was at the end of the corridor. She pressed the button, watching the metal doors open with a discreet creak. The mirror inside the elevator was slightly stained, reflecting her pale face and deep dark circles. She stepped inside, pressed the button for the ground floor, and leaned against the wall, closing her eyes for a moment. The elevator motor hummed, and it began to descend. Then, for no apparent reason, it stopped on the 7th floor. The door slid sideways, revealing a dark, empty hallway. Camila frowned. She knew the 7th floor had been closed for months. Some infrastructure problem, they said. No one worked there anymore. A cold draft ran through the elevator, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. The motion sensor in the hallway should have turned on the lights, but everything remained dark. And then she saw it. Not from the front. Not from the hallway. But in the mirror. Behind her. A woman dressed in white, her long hair covering part of her face, was leaning forward slightly. Her lips moved, murmuring something inaudible. Camila felt the air escape her lungs. Her body froze. A tremor ran up her spine, and panic spread like wildfire. The button for the ground floor was still glowing red, but the elevator wasn't moving. She didn't want to look directly back, but she had to. She turned slowly, her fingers shaking as they gripped the handle of her bag. The elevator was empty. The hallway was empty, too. The mirror reflected only her. The elevator shook, and with a dull thud, the door closed. The cabin began to descend, now at a faster pace than usual. Camila fell to her knees, feeling her heart explode inside her chest. What had just happened? When the doors finally opened on the ground floor, she stumbled out, holding onto the wall to keep from falling. The building was silent as always. But Camila knew something else was there. And it wouldn't leave her alone. The next day was a struggle to maintain her sanity. Camila felt exhausted, as if she had run a marathon. The episode from the previous night haunted her thoughts. She tried to rationalize. Maybe it had just been a hallucination caused by fatigue. The reflection in the mirror could have been a play of light and shadow. But deep down, she knew that wasn't it. While drinking coffee that morning, she noticed something strange on her skin. Red scratches on the side of her arm, as if nails had dug in there. She didn't remember getting hurt. When she got to the office, she avoided looking at the elevator. She went up the stairs, feeling the weight of fear tightening her chest with each step. On the 12th floor, where her department was located, everything seemed normal. The day went by like any other, but Camila felt like she was being watched. Every time she passed by the reflective glass of the meeting room, the feeling that something was moving behind her was inescapable. When work ended, she decided to leave early. But when she got to the ground floor, she froze. The elevator was there, with its doors open, waiting. The number 7 flashed on the digital display. Someone had called from the 7th floor. But no one worked there. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but she stayed. She needed to know. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 7th floor. The doors closed, and the descent began. But then, with a metallic click, the elevator stopped between floors. The lights flickered, and the mirror reflected the impossible. The woman in white was there. Closer. Her eyes were now visible, sunken in dark shadows. This time, Camila heard the whisper. A name. Her name. She screamed. The lights went out. Camila's scream was swallowed up by the darkness. The elevator was dead, suspended between floors, surrounded by a suffocating silence. The only sound was her labored, irregular breathing. She felt something brush against her arm, cold as metal but with the texture of skin. Her breath hitched, terror digging sharp claws into her chest. Then, the whisper came again. Clearer. Camila. Her name slid through the air like sweet poison, lingering in her mind as if she had heard it 1,000 times before. She fumbled for her cell phone in her pocket and tried to turn on the flashlight. The light flickered, revealing only the metal walls of the elevator. No reflection. No sign of the woman in white. But Camila could feel it. Something was there. The mirror at the back of the cabin seemed darker than it should have been, as if there was a space beyond it. Something hidden. Then, a knock. On the other side of the mirror. Camila swallowed hard. Every fiber of her being screamed at her not to move, not to look, to pretend this wasn't happening. But something inside her knew that running away was no longer an option. With shaking hands, she lifted the flashlight on her cell phone and pointed it at the mirror. Her reflection was there, pale and horrified. But behind it, in the darkness that seemed to expand like an abyss, the woman in white hovered. Her face was still hidden by her hair, but something was oozing from her mouth. Something dark, thick, that seemed to move of its own accord. Then her head tilted at an impossible angle. And Camila heard it. A scream. Not hers, but the woman's. The elevator lights exploded back on, and the cabin plummeted. Camila held on to the side rail, her stomach twisting in absolute panic. The control panel blinked frantically, the numbers jumbled, spinning as if possessed. The impact came like a brutal punch. The door burst open, but not to the ground floor. Not to any floor she knew. It was the 7th. And it wasn't empty. The hallway before her was different from what she remembered. The walls were covered in dark damp, and a putrid smell filled the air. The floor was made of old cracked tiles, as if no one had stepped foot there in decades. And yet, Camila knew. She wasn't alone. The elevator began to close its doors, but a white figure stepped through the opening and entered the cabin. Camila's body froze. Her long hair flowed like dead roots, and the woman in white finally raised her face. Her eyes were empty holes. Her mouth was sewn shut with black threads, which seemed to pull her skin inward. But even without speaking, Camila understood. The elevator was not a means of transportation. It was a portal. And she had gone to the wrong side. The door closed behind her, and everything went dark. She didn't know how much time had passed. Seconds. Minutes. Hours. The elevator now seemed like an infinite space. The mirror in the background reflected something that wasn't her. Another Camila. Thinner. Paler. With sunken, empty eyes. She smiled. You took a while. The 7th floor wasn't a place. It was a destination. And Camila had finally reached it. No one ever saw Camila leave the building again that night. The security guards searched the building after the system registered a failure in the elevator. But it was working normally when they arrived. The cameras showed Camila entering the elevator, but never leaving. Her belongings were still in the office. Her cell phone was on the desk, with an unsent message on the screen. If anything happens to me, the elevator on the 7th floor. That was the end of the sentence. The search lasted for weeks. The case appeared in the newspapers. But, over time, it was forgotten. Until, months later, a new employee of the building was leaving work late. He entered the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. But the elevator stopped on the 7th floor. The door opened. And, in the mirror, he saw a woman in white. Her face was familiar. He had seen her on the missing persons posters. Camila. She smiled. And the door closed. The elevator began to descend. But the employee never reached the ground floor. The 7th floor always takes whoever enters, and never lets them out.